Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. If you like to build or repair guitars, I suggest you click that subscribe button down below, and you'll become part of a community of fellow luthiers. And together, we can take your skills to a whole new level. If you'd like to support my guitar building YouTube channel, visit eguitarplans.com and buy a plan. A link is in the description below. Now on with the video. In this episode, I'm going to be covering part 12 of the Highline Echo laminated top guitar build, and that means I'm going to be buffing out this clear coat to a high gloss shine using my buffing machine. But before I jump into that, I wanted to address a couple of things that came up in the last episode where I talked about level sanding and polish sanding the finish before buffing. And one of the comments that a viewer left was, they were confused because it seems like I keep changing the abrasives that I like to use when it comes to level sanding and polish sanding. And while it may seem that way, in truth, I don't. You have to remember, when you go back and watch one of my videos, if it pops up in your YouTube suggested videos, that video may have been posted originally years ago. And at that time, I may have been using a different type of abrasive. When I first started using water-based finishes, I like to level sand and polish sand using 3M 216U free cut gold sandpaper, followed by Mirka Abralon. And that approach worked fairly well. But then I discovered Super Acelix, and that's the product I've been using ever since. And it's been a couple of years since maybe 2 years since I started using it. At any rate, in the last episode, I decided to try another new product, which was the 3M flexible hook-it abrasives. And they seemed like they were very similar to the Super Acelix, so I just wanted to give it a try and see if that might be an alternative. Well, as it turns out, even after using that 3M hook-it product, I've decided that going forward, I'm going to stick with the Super Acelix. I just think it's a more technologically advanced and a better product. So that's what I plan to do. And in fact, I think in an upcoming episode, I'm going to kind of dive in a little bit deeper about using this product. And I'm going to try some different ideas with it. So stay tuned for that. But that's kind of where things stand with my level sanding and polish sanding approach. I'm using the Super Acelix. Now let's jump in and I'll show you how I buff out this clear coat to a high gloss shine. Okay, so first things first. When I buff a guitar, I use a buffing machine. I learned a long time ago that a buffing machine is by far the best way to get a scratch-free, mirror-like high gloss shine on your guitar finishes. And the machine that I'm using is one that I designed and built myself. In fact, if you head over to eguitarplans.com, you'll see I offer a set of plans for a buffing machine. This was the prototype. It is, however, a little bit different than the one that I offer the plans for, because after I built this machine, I decided there was a couple of changes I wanted to make in the design to make it work a little bit better. And eventually, at some point, I plan to rebuild this machine to follow those plans more closely so that I can actually enjoy some of those features. And it's really the only difference is I eliminated the top, this big flat space, to give more access to the buffing wheels. And then I moved the motor down lower so that the machine has a lower center of gravity and is a little bit more stable. Now this machine's pretty good. It's stable enough for what I need, but those were some of the changes that I made. Now when I'm buffing, I always use a mask and a face shield, because these things will throw off a lot of debris as you're buffing, and that's just a good idea to protect yourself. I'm using typically 14-inch soft cotton flannel wheels, and I've got wheels on both sides. On this side, this is where I do my initial buffing, and I'll use Menzerna P204 medium cut compound with this wheel. And this is what's going to bring up the initial shine. Then, to really make it, refine it to make it look even better, I'll switch to this wheel, and I'll use the Menzerna P175 Super Finish compound, and that will just increase that shine ever so slightly more to the level that we luthiers like to see in a guitar finish. Now, before I start buffing, I'm going to use a rake to remove some of the chunks of compound that were left over from the last buffing session. If I don't get rid of those, they're going to come around at high speed and slam into the finish on the guitar and put some scratches in it that I can't remove without going back to sanding. So I'll start with this, and then once I have finished cleaning off that compound, I'll grab a sharp pair of scissors and I'll simply go in and start trimming away some of the bits and pieces of the wheel that are sticking out. This is just a way of kind of cleaning up the wheel and grooming it for the next session. Because if I don't do that, there could be long strands sticking out, and those are whipping around at high speed, roughly about 1,000 RPM. And if there's compound on them, they can slap into the guitar surface and leave scratches just like the chunks of compound will. So it's always a good idea to go around and look for any stray pieces that are sticking out and trim those off with a pair of scissors. And then once I've got it groomed, I'm ready to start the buffing process. Now, it's important that the wheels on your buffing machine spin in the correct direction, and that means down and away. So it's actually going to be turning in this direction. The reason is we're going to be buffing down at this lower part of the wheel. That means if, for some reason, if the guitar body or the neck were to catch, it would be thrown down and away from me. If I were buffing up here, it would get thrown up into my face. So that's a safety issue that's extremely important. This particular machine is going to be spinning at about 1,000 RPM, and it can easily throw something at a high enough speed that it could cause injury or damage in your shop. So that's the reason why it has to spin that way. Now, another safety concern to be aware of is long hair and loose clothing. You don't want to be working around machinery like this if you've got loose sleeves hanging down, a loose jacket in front of you, or long hair. Tie back that hair, lose the jacket, roll up your sleeves, and be safe. Now, the first step in the buffing process is to apply some of the Menzerna medium cut compound to the buffing wheel. And I like to use a fairly liberal amount, so I'll apply that to the edge of the wheel before I start buffing. And the technique that I use is to apply a moderate amount of pressure while I keep the body moving. I don't want to linger in one spot for too long, and I don't want to apply too much pressure. This is especially important around sharp corners and edges because I could burn through the finish. It's also important to have really good overhead lighting in the area where you're doing your buffing. That way you can gauge the progress of your work. And to do this, as I'm buffing, every so often I'll stop and I'll hold the guitar where I can see the reflection of my overhead lighting, and this can help me to see the scratches on the surface, and I'll be able to determine where I need to continue buffing. And while I'm buffing, I'll keep an eye on that edge, and as it starts to look like it's losing the color of the compound, I'll recharge it and continue on. Now, occasionally I'll encounter scratches that I can't remove with the medium compound. So I have another set of wheels that I can use with a Menzerna Brown coarse compound, which I can then swap out to help deal with some of those more pronounced scratches. And then after I've used the coarser compound, I'll go back to my medium wheel with the medium compound and rebuff those areas so that everything matches in terms of the quality of the shine. Once I've finished buffing, I'll immediately hang up the guitar and let it cool. This is important because the process of buffing generates heat, which softens the finish. And if I try to wipe off the residue while that surface is still warm, I run the risk of scratching my clear coat. And at this stage, you can see how light reflects off the surface, which is a gauge of my progress so far with the medium cut buffing. But I'm not done yet. Now, to really refine the shine, I'm going to buff with the Benzerna Super Finish compound on a separate set of wheels. And of course, I'll need to groom those and rake them before I can start buffing. The process for buffing at this stage is pretty much the same as it was when I was using the medium compound. First thing I'll do is I'll load up the wheel with some of the Super Finish compound, and then I'll start buffing by using moderate pressure while constantly moving the surface of the guitar so that I don't run the risk of burning through the finish. And then once it's finished, I'll hang it up again for about 30 minutes to let it cool before I wipe off the residue. And at that stage, I like to do what I call the window test. And this is how I gauge the quality of the reflections in the surface that I've just buffed. And that's how I use my home-built buffing machine to buff out my clear coat finishes on my guitars to a high gloss, mirror-like shine. There's really no better way to do this. Now, one thing I should stress before I sign off is the techniques that you use may differ slightly from what I've done based on the type of clear coat you used. Now, as I said before, I used a water-based clear coat on my guitars, so the approach that I use works pretty well for me. But if you're using like a 2K polyurethane or polyester or nitrocellulose, you may want to change your buffing technique in order to bring those type of clear coats up to that high gloss mirror-like shine. As a result, you may want to experiment with different sized pulleys on the motor in order to change the speed of the wheels as they're spinning. You can also change the size and the type of wheel that you're using, and you can change the type of compound that you're using with the buffing machine. There are a variety of different compounds out there. Each one will do different things in terms of scratch removal and bringing up that high gloss shine. So this is an approach that has some flexibility, and you can try some different things to achieve success. At any rate, I hope you found this video to be useful. I think it's a good jumping off point to get started in machine buffing your guitars. And if so, give me that thumbs up. If you don't already subscribe and like watching videos on building guitars, click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that every time I post a new video, which is a couple of times a week, you'll get notified when those videos are available. And if you have any comments or questions, leave them down below and I'll do my best to answer them, or maybe somebody else in the community will jump in and answer. At any rate, until the next episode, take care and I'll see you soon.